Hey Optimancers, Chris here. This is my second video for the ranking of all 114 official subclasses in the game. In the first video I discussed the Artificer subclasses, and now we're moving on to the Barbarian. If you would be interested in supporting this content, please check out the link in the video description to go to my Patreon. Patrons of this channel see these videos early and non-monetized, and my top level patrons can join me to play some D&D, which I DM each month. Today, I would like to recognize these top-level patrons: Sig, Stephen Edmondson, TUM, Tazel, Thomas Barrero, Thomas Van Lursel, and Tristan. Thank you so much for your support. Let's get started. Here's where I go over how it's going to work, so if you watch my previous video, you might want to skip to the next segment in the video timeline. If this is the first of the series you're watching, you'll want to stick around for this part. So here is how it will work. I will not be discussing any subclass that is not official content. So subclasses that are third-party or playtest material are not included. This is a power ranking, so I'm not taking into account how well they are designed in this ranking, or my personal preference. This will take into account how powerful they are as a single class build, as well as how powerful they are when multi-classed. I will be assuming feats are allowed and used, and that all the optional class features in Tash's Cauldron of Everything are allowed as well. Just some things to note as well. Features are weighted by how soon they are received. A feature you get at level 3 is much more valuable than a feature you get at level 10. Because these features see way more gameplay when you actually play the subclass. So this is not a comparison of which of these subclasses are more powerful at 20th level. I don't think that's very relevant to players. This is a comparison as to which you will find most powerful, assuming you are starting at low level and advancing levels through gameplay. A feature you have for 100% of that time is 5 times more valuable than a feature you're going to have for 20%. And although I will consider all 3 pillars of gameplay, I will be weighing the combat tier most heavily. The combat tier tends to be the tier that is most reliant on mechanics, and mechanics is what I'm looking at here. I also assume you will not be playing as a solo character. So features that work well with teammates, or even better, improve your teammates, will be considered in the ranking. Now before we begin, I'm going to address a couple common misconceptions before they come up. A bad feature does not make a subclass less powerful. I can add 10 terrible and practically useless features to the most powerful subclasses, and they're still the most powerful. I'm only looking at features that make a subclass better. Secondly, just because a feature can be replicated with a feat does not mean the feature isn't good. Feats are not free, and they can be very powerful. They can even be more powerful than a subclass feature. So, a feature that can be replicated by a good feat can still be a great feature, improving the power level of the subclass. And the person playing that subclass has 1 extra feat they can use on any of the many potent feats in the game. I guarantee you're not going to have enough feats, and having 1 more is a big benefit. These rankings, of course, are subjective, and I don't expect anyone to agree with them in their entirety. And I do have some personal biases, which will probably become apparent. I like spells. I think they can be very powerful. And that's going to be clear enough as we move forward. Also, I should say, I like to make my saving throws, and I don't care who knows it. Give me a way to do that more reliably, and I'm likely to consider a subclass more powerful because of it. Finally, I don't assume you will be limited to 1 encounter per day. I don't assume you will have short rests whenever you want. So features that can be used more often I consider to be more powerful than single-use ones. Now, this is a very common rating system in D&D for the ranking of classes and subclasses, and it includes anywhere from the S tier being the highest and the D tier being the lowest, and I will not be using it. Instead, I'll be using this expanded tier chart that includes an E and F tier. Here are the criteria I will be ranking the subclasses with. If I give a subclass an S tier ranking, I don't just think it's powerful. I think it's probably too powerful. I think there are some potentially game-breaking mechanics involved, and these are going to come into play without requiring high-level play at all. My issue with these subclasses is you have a real possibility of invalidating other player character features. This can lead to overshadowing other players, and so if you're a power gamer, these options are for you. If you aren't, I think I would think carefully before selecting an S tier subclass. If I give a subclass an A tier ranking, I think it's a very powerful option. Characters using an A tier subclass are easy to optimize and have features that should be showstoppers in gameplay, stomping down challenges with abandon. We may not break the game, but we're definitely going to make it a fair bit easier. If I give a subclass a B tier ranking, I think it's a good subclass. Optimizing a B tier subclass should result in a very effective character that has a strong contribution to a party of characters. Even with limited optimization, a B tier subclass is probably still going to be reasonably effective. If I give a subclass a C tier ranking, I think it's a decent option. Optimizing a C tier subclass may require a bit more thought about how to make the best use of the features, but they can still be quite effective if handled with some thought and consideration. If I give a subclass a D tier ranking, I think it's serviceable. Optimizing a D tier rank subclass will lead to a decent character that can usually still pull their weight, but I wouldn't expect to stand out. If I give a subclass an E tier ranking, I think it's a weaker option. An E tier subclass needs some extra effort to make a character that contributes effectively at all, or perhaps the contributions they make end up being extremely narrow, or rely heavily on other characters helping them out. It's still possible to make a character that can be somewhat effective with an E tier subclass, but if you just play it as it's presented, you can probably expect a disappointing experience. If I give a subclass an F tier ranking, I think it's basically unredeemable. An F tier ranked subclass differentiates from an E tier subclass because it is bound to disappoint, and there just aren't any good ways to optimize it to make it worthwhile. And the F tier subclasses, along with the S tier subclasses, I think can be a problem when considering a team of players because they create pretty overwhelming imbalance. Subclasses aren't balanced against each other, and that's normally okay. But when you have these extreme cases on either end, it can weaken the game. When subclasses receive the same rank, I will be placing subclasses I think are more potent, more to the left of the chart, with the weaker further to the right. So at the end of this series, I will have a comprehensive list from top to bottom of every class and subclass combination in the game, all 114 of them. So today, let's talk Barbarian. This is a class that performs a lot better either at low levels or multiclassed at higher levels. That's because it gets the big ability, Rage, right off the bat. Then the second big ability, Reckless, at level 2, along with a solid dexterity save boost, and then extra attack at level 5, and then after that, there's some okay things like advantage on initiative is nice at 7, and there are some rage boosts that come up, but they're all coming on pretty late, and rage is scaling very slowly. Ultimately, a high-level barbarian does slightly more damage with rage-based attacks and can rage more often, but there's not a lot of meaty stuff at those higher levels. They're largely just relying on feats and increase to proficiency bonus to be better than a 5th level barbarian. So put this on a class with no spells and can't concentrate on spells when raging, and those high level barbarians just don't do the damage that other martial classes can do unless we find a way to boost our criticals somehow. And that's likely working off a lower armor class as well. You can take a lot of damage, but then you need to rely on someone to heal that for you. So as a chassis, the Barbarian, it's okay, but it's not stellar. If you are used to low-level play, you're probably used to Barbarians being very effective. If you are used to high-level play and you've seen single-class Barbarians, you know what I'm talking about. So going through the subclasses, first we have the path of the Ancestral Guardian. This subclass focuses on protecting the rest of the party and was introduced in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Our attacks, when we're raged, cause the target to have disadvantage to attack anyone but us, and they have resistance to the damage. Eventually we can reduce that damage even further, and at high levels we get a couple utility spells, and we can damage enemies that we marked if they attack our allies. So in terms of the number of things this subclass brings to protect allies, it really is unmatched. The downside, of course, is that the enemy can just attack us instead. And so unless we are hard to hit, which isn't always easy to achieve without sacrificing offense on a barbarian, even with rage granted resistance, those hit points, they just don't last forever. And we're likely going to need to be healed a lot. Also, and this may be the bigger issue, our uses of rage are limited, and they're only recovered on a long rest. So we likely aren't raged all the time, meaning we can only be this defender some of the time. And this subclass doesn't get anything for when they're not raged until high level. Since our abilities rely on us raging, then the rest of the time, we do become pretty deflated. Still, when it comes to options for a weapon user to draw enemy attacks, this is one of the better options. And the abilities they have are useful when they're active and are fairly potent. So I think you can make a decently effective character as an Ancestral Barbarian, good enough for a C ranking. The next subclass is the Path of the Battlerager. This subclass was introduced in the Sword Coast Adventures Guide, and it was intended as an offensive option for barbarians. This is the only subclass for barbarians, and I think now it's the only subclass in the game that is still restricted by race. You must be a dwarf. And that's not a terrible race to be when you're a barbarian, but it definitely restricts your options. The primary feature of the subclass is the Battlerager armor, which is basically scale mail, except you can do a bonus action attack for a d4 plus strength damage when you're raging. There are now a lot of bonus action attack options in the game, and this just is not one of the better ones. And also, can we really count on getting magic spiked armor? I have never seen any magic spiked armor in any game I have ever been in. Also, it's defensively the same as scale mail, so if we want better armor, then we have to give up this feature. There's a little add-on that we do a tiny bit of damage when we grapple, but 3 damage is barely worth the mention. Back when this was released, there were a limited number of ways to get a good bonus action with a barbarian, especially if you were playing without feats. But if you are playing with feats, and using more recent materials, this really turns into a stinker in comparison. Later, we get a few temporary hit points when we rage. Again, this is overshadowed by newer and better temporary hit point options. At higher levels, we can give up that bonus action attack to dash, again, only for raging. And didn't rogues get more than this at second level without limitations? Our 14th level ability is so bad, I won't even waste the breath. This one, it's pretty awful, because the Barbarian itself is somewhat serviceable, and only for that reason. This manages to squeak an E rating. Grab a two-handed weapon and grade a weapon mastery, and your damage will be okay until you reach higher levels. But this will give you the least of any Barbarian subclass. And that brings us to Path of the Beast, which we received in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. This one actually gives us a pretty cool power at level 3, where we can grow a bestial natural weapon when we rage, which can provide an extra attack, a pretty weak healing option, or a reaction defense. Barbarian subclasses tend not to have armor class boosts, so that's a nice feature. We also eventually have those natural attacks treated as magical, and we get some movement options, and those don't rely on us raging. We get a couple decent abilities at higher levels, though nothing too exciting. Still, this one works fairly well, and it's not hard to make a decently effective character when using this subclass, so it is a solid C ranking for me, and I'm even going to move Ancestral Guardian over, as Beast I think is a little bit stronger. The next option is Path of the Berserker, right from the player's handbook. Our 3rd level ability is a special rage called Frenzy, where we can attack with our bonus action, and we can do that with our main weapon, which would be decent if our frenzy didn't cause exhaustion, except it does, and exhaustion is bad, and it's not easy to get rid of, And it gets progressively worse as it stacks up, which means every time we use this feature, we get punished with progressively worse punishments. Now, a bonus action attack, it's nice, but again, bonus action attacks are not so rare or unachievable that it's worth taking this kind of punishment to get one. And this is our only 3rd level feature. Now, the 6th level feature, preventing Charm or Frightened when raging, is actually the best feature this subclass gets, but it's limited use and not until level 6. Beyond that, our level 10 feature is poor, and our level 14 feature, it's decent. So we end up with a okay 6th level and 14th level feature, and yeah, this one is a problem. That exhaustion effect really takes what might have been a good subclass and puts it in the bad pile. Is it as bad as the Battlerager? No, not quite. But it's in the same ranking, an E. Next is Path of the Storm Herald. This one was first seen in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Our main feature is a 10-foot aura we get when we rage, and we can choose between desert, sea, or tundra. None of them are very good. One example is 2 damage to everyone in the aura when we activate our rage. You didn't mishear? 2 damage? It scales all the way up to 6 damage when we get to 20th level. Then we can use our bonus action to do it again. I mean, that is a terrible bonus action. Or we could get a d6, save for half. So that's actually probably less than 2. Or we could give 2 temporary hit points to allies in the aura, again using our bonus actions, and believe it or not, that's the best one. Now, there is definitely an improvement at 6th level, as we get some real resistances, and they don't even require us to be raging. We can have fire, cold, or lightning resistance, and they're all good, and we get a little fun power to go with it. So that's a solid ability. The later levels bring some okay options, so in the end, this one, it's not terrible, but we aren't getting our first decent feature until level 6, and that's a big drawback. So this one sneaks up to a D ranking, but that's it. Our next subclass is the Totem Warrior, which is from the Player's Handbook. Our 3rd level feature gives us a few options for additional benefit when we rage, but I mean the clear standout is the Bear feature, which extends our resistance to all damage except Psychic. This is a pretty huge benefit that really ups the durability of the Bear Totem Barbarian. Some of the other options are decent. I mean, there's a 15-foot bonus to movement speed or advantage on melee attacks against enemies next to you, but the resistance boost really does stand out to me. Strangely, our level 6 features are not as good as the level 3 features. The best is probably the Elk option, which was an expansion to the subclass in the Sword Coast Adventures Guide that gives 2 skill proficiencies, so that's okay. The later abilities include some utility ritual casting and some more so-so totem options. Because this one gives us a good level 3 feature though, this is our durable Barbarian option. And that alone makes it work well enough for a C ranking for me. Our next subclass is the Wild Magic Barbarian, one of the new subclasses in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. The main feature here is a random table that provides an additional benefit to you when you rage, but don't count on being able to use that benefit. And you would think, being that they're random and that is a disadvantage, that they might be pretty potent, or at least some of them might be really potent. And if you think a Flump or Pixie appearing and exploding for a d6 damage, providing a saving throw for 0 damage is potent, or giving your glaive the light and thorn properties, then I guess we'll have to agree to disagree. Some of them are better than that, but none of them are amazing. That's a big miss for this subclass, and it really kind of centers around this feature. Now I will say, once again, the level 6 ability isn't bad at all, but it's followed by a pretty lame ability at level 10 and again at level 14. Now, this one isn't problematic like the Berserker, where you're actually being punished for using your feature, and I would say it's still better than a Battlerager, but not by much, and not enough to lift it over the E ranking. So I'm going to move the Battlerager and Berserker over, because it is better than those subclasses, but it's still ranked E. And then finally, we have Path of the Zealot. This one is from Xanathar's, and it comes in right off the bat with extra damage on our first hit on our turn when we're raging. The damage, it's not bad at all. D6 plus half our Barbarian level. We see all these subclasses now giving a D6 once on your turn. This adds a half our Barbarian level as well, so as we move up in levels, it'll get better and better, and eventually the D6 will be the minority of that damage. And there's nothing wrong with that. Then we can be raised without material components. This is also right at level 3, so it's a get out of death free feature. I mean, it's a bit morbid, but it's solid. So we get a fair bit right at level 3. Then at level 6 we get a saving throw boost. I love a good saving throw boost. And this one, it's like Indomitable, but you get it every time you rage, and you get it earlier than the fighter gets it. The later abilities, they're not bad either. This is very much our straightforward Barbarian. It does more damage, has better defense, and it can die, as Barbarians are prone to do, without the cost. So this one, I would say, is the best of the lot. I can't justify higher than C here, but it is the highest C ranking of the Barbarians, so I'm going to move these ones all over, and Zealot goes right next to the C. So that is our list for today. Like with the Artificer, we aren't high up on the chart here, but at least we have a number of fairly solid options. Now, this chart here is ranked together. It just happens at this point that the Artificer happens to be the best for rank C, D, and E. So our best to worst in order, the Zealot, Beast, Ancestral Guardian, Totem Warrior, Storm Herald, Wild Magic, Berserker, and the Battlerager bringing up the rear. Our best subclass to date, still the Battlesmith. So I hope you enjoyed that. We'll be moving forward to Bards in our next ranking video, and I expect at that time we're going to fill in some of those higher ranks, so I hope you'll join me for that. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody. Talk to you soon.